Mayor Corker, I'd like to give you an opportunity to address some issues that were raised having to do with abortion. In 1994, you said you didn't believe abortion was a governmental issue. During the primary debates, you said you were wrong in 1994. This is quite a 180. Some voters have questioned whether this shift in perspective was politically motivated. What brought about the change?
Well, you've asked me that question several times, and I appreciate it. I was wrong in '94. I didn't understand the issue even in the proper way. It was the first time I'd run for public office. I served later. I've raised two daughters that are beautiful and mean the most to me of anything in the world other than my beautiful wife, Elizabeth, who's with me tonight. But I'm pro-life. I've been pro-life for years. The National Right to Life has endorsed me. And again, my opponent and I share very, very different views. By the way, good people can differ on this issue, but one thing for sure, I am pro-life. I will support in the United States Senate a culture of life, and that's something that people across the state of Tennessee can count on me to do.
The book of Matthew tells us not to judge. Mr. Mayor, I take your answer for what it's worth, so that you've grown since 1994 and you didn't know a whole lot when you ran for office the first time, and I respect that. But you ought to show me the same courtesy, sir. I've grown and matured into Congress as well. And that's what you want in elected officials, people who can say they're right and they're wrong. And then when someone else says it, sir, to be able to say, you know what, I know people can mature and grow. Now, you make the point about how long I've been in Washington. I would remind you, Mr. Corker, you ran for Senate, sir, in '94, and you were rejected by the voters. Had you been elected, you'd have been in the Senate now for 12 years. Would you then consider yourself having 12 years of experience that was meaningless? And then you go on, you tell people all the time, I'm this liberal and I've been there 10 years. Sir, I would just ask, if you think this job is so meaningless, why have you spent $2.25 million of your own money, and why are you running at all if this job is so meaningless, if what you're doing is so much more meaningful?
Well, actually, this is a very important job, and the reason I continue to point that out is I keep hearing this generation of change, and all I'm saying is you've been there for 10 years, and I think what people want in Washington is somebody who's shown the ability to solve problems, complex problems, and bring people together around that. I've demonstrated that through a lifetime of work right here in the state of Tennessee. And I think that's what people want. And just pointing out you've been there for 10 years. If I had been there for 10 years, I wouldn't be able to say the things that you say on the campaign trail.
All right. Claudia.
All right, Richard. With us now is Sarah Poole, and she has a question, and we're going to begin with you, Congressman Ford.
Yes, ma'am.
Congressman Ford, on one of your most recent ads, you're depicted in a church highlighting your Christian beliefs.
Yes,
I was just wondering if those religious beliefs affect your political decisions, and if so, how?
Well, it's a great question. That's my home church. I don't have my pastor with me tonight, Reverend Smith. He's home, probably not home yet because he had to do 2 weddings tonight, and he couldn't make it. So my surrogate pastor, Keith Norman, is here from First Baptist, and I appreciate it. I was baptized in that church. I was raised in that church. I learned to go to church the old-fashioned way. I was forced to. And I kept going. I didn't want to. I'd sit in the back of the church and play, and finally, I realized it was the best thing for me. I can't divorce who I am when I'm in Congress from how I was raised. I'm the chairman and the co-founder. In some of those meaningless years, Mr. Corker, I founded the faith-based caucus in the Congress, along with a Republican from Wisconsin named Mark Green. And we've tried our hardest to pass legislation to encourage our colleagues to think differently when faith is invoked and faith is raised on a variety of issues. And we've also tried to tone down a decibel level and to remind people that Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and reminds us all that the love and mercy and bounty of God, we should fear him, but we should love him as well. And I've tried my hardest to live by those principles. I'm not perfect, but he is. And I try to live by that.
Mayor Corker.
Absolutely. I would not be here tonight in Memphis. I wouldn't be in this office if it weren't for my faith. I grew up in the Methodist Church, and when I was about 28 or 30 years old, I went on a mission trip to Haiti. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. I came back to Chattanooga where my company was growing and I needed to be. I began working in the inner city, and I saw a lot of people that lived in housing that was not fit for human beings. And so I led the creation of a nonprofit that today has helped over 10,000 families in Chattanooga have decent housing. And because of that experience, I began to testify in Senate hearings and was asked to be on a governor's task force. And I decided I wanted to make a difference in the public arena. And I think that's what being in the public arena is all about. And that is solving problems that actually make people's lives better. That's what I want to do in the United States Senate. That's why I'm running for this office. I think our country faces the most complex issues that we've dealt with in decades. And I want to be part of bringing people together to solve those
Thank you,
problems,
Mayor.
to ensure that this is
Thank you,
another
Mayor.
great American
Congressman, you get 30
family.
seconds.
The other thing we got to be conscious of when we talk about faith is that some people are dishonest about it. Some people talk about how important their faith is, and they vote against packages that would provide relief for people who were affected by Hurricane Katrina. Some people talk about it, then they vote to make drugs more expensive for seniors. And they talk about it, and they cut funding for education for kids. I haven't done that in 10 years in the Congress as I've worked with people across the aisle, and I can assure you, in the United States Senate, I wouldn't do it there either. If I did, my pastor would come looking for me.
All right, thank you, Congressman. We have time for one more question tonight. It's going to be Norm Brewer's question. What's your question for the Congressman?
Congressman, you and Mr. Corker have called for toughening the security of U.S. borders, but specifically with ditches, fences, razor wire troops. How do we do that?
I voted for the strongest anti-legal immigration bill to come before the Congress for two reasons. One, we have a security challenge. If you're a terrorist, the easiest way to get in this country is the northern or southern border. Number two, if we decide as a nation that we want to determine who gets in and who does not get in, then we have to have a better immigration policy. The 9/11 Commission, which is made up of Republicans and Democrats, 10 of them, you rarely find unanimity in anything in life, certainly not politics. They agreed on about 50 recommendations. There are 41 that have not been implemented. I believe we ought to implement all of them. A few of them address not only our borders, but our ports. Number two, I think you have to hold employers accountable when they hire illegals. And the law is what it is, and we have to follow it. If there were no jobs and no opportunities, it's unlikely that people would come across the border. You can't just blame one side. You got to blame both and hold both sides accountable.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a number of things that we need to do to solve the problem. Obviously, the first is to secure the border. I was down at mile 6 on the Mexico-Arizona border, and it's amazing how porous that is, and we need to solve that. Number two, we need to make sure we eliminate the bureaucracies around people working temporarily in our country, and we're able to know when people are coming and going in that regard, but only allow people to work here when they're legal. Certainly, we need to make sure that we have employer identification. Right now, as I visit around and talk to people, lots of people have documents, but there's so much document fraud that takes place. We need to make sure there's an easily verifiable way for that to occur, and then we need to punish people who abuse the process.
Congressman Ford.
We have a challenge in the country, and Mayor Corker was cited. He's the only candidate, I think, in the country who's ever been cited by the Immigration and Naturalization Service for hiring illegals. Mr. Corker says that it was a subcontractor that did it, but the law was clear. If you work for the contractor's held responsible. But even if Mr. Corker is right, the question I would have for him is, when you learned that there were illegals working on the site, why didn't you just fire the subcontractor? Not just the first time, but they came back 3 times. I voted for the toughest bill. We'll continue to do that in the United States Senate.
Thank you, Congressman.
And we'll say to the president or anyone who
Thank
wants
you,
amnesty
Congressman.
that I'm opposed
Appreciate
to
it.